Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Davis, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager for Fear Free. Thank you for joining us for Fear Free Home Spa Days. Presenting today is Fear Free Certified Trainer and Groomer Daniel Josselyn-Creighton, KPA CTP, and he will be discussing the importance of fear free grooming, how to perform basic grooming tasks, and more. If you have any questions during the webinar, please be sure to enter them in the Q&A box. We will have a brief Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We're so excited to have Daniel here with us today. So on that note, Daniel, take it away.
Great, thank you. My name is Dan Josselyn, owner of Golden Rule Dog Training. And I also spent several years as a dog groomer before I started doing dog training. And some of the struggles that I had as a dog groomer is the reason I became a dog trainer. And I'm also going to be doing this presentation with the assistance of my teammates, Buffy and Spike. And Buffy and Spike have been a lot of help with me as a groomer and a dog trainer. Buffy we've had for 12 years, and I made a lot of mistakes when I was just starting to learn training. And Spike we've only had for a few months. We recently adopted him. And I did a lot of work with grooming and training with Spike because he had never actually lived in a home before. He was a street dog and a shelter dog, and the only grooming or vet work he had done was heavily sedated. So we've had to do a lot of work helping him get used to grooming and vetting, and it's been a very rewarding experience. He's done a great job. So some of the things we're going to talk about today are going to be introducing new equipment and procedures to your dogs to help them get used to being handled, getting used to new pieces of equipment, and hopefully not getting scared by them. We're also going to teach them things like targeting and impulse control games to help make them more comfortable sitting on a table for simple procedures. And we're going to use the fear-free considered approach using touch gradient and gentle control, and using the FAS scale to determine if you can continue. So if a dog is displaying fear, anxiety, and stress levels 4 or 5 and higher, then obviously we can't continue. We need to give the dog a break. So it's going to be very, very important to keep a close eye on your dog's body language when you're working with the dog, when you're doing any kind of work, trying to help the dog get their grooming need. And you can also use the FA scale to guide your training sessions too, as you're teaching dogs to just get used to new equipment and get used to new procedures. So if your dog starts getting stressed out during a training session or a conditioning session, you need to give them a little break. You need to be mindful of their emotional state. You want to make sure that we're not making things harder on them than it needs to be. And so here's a snapshot of the FAS scale. Most of you should have access to this. You can get on the Fear Free website. And there's the good thing about it is it takes a lot of the guesswork out for you. So it tells you at what point you need to take a break, and at what point you need to exercise caution, and at what point the dog is good to go and they're having a decent time. So one of the first things that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to classically condition our dogs to new items, new experiences, like some of the things that we see here on the left-hand side of the screen: brushes, combs. There's a mat breaker there. There's a dog, one of my old buddies keep. We use him at a full body mohawk from head to tail, sitting on a table, and there's another little dog getting a bath. And we want to pair these new experiences up with good things that they find rewarding, like toys, treats. If your dog likes hugs, great. A hug can be a good reward, but most dogs aren't super crazy about it. This dog we see here on the screen, this big guy here, Celeste, that dog likes hugs. Most don't though, so you need to be careful and mindful of that. So we want to classically condition dogs to some new equipment: brushes, nail clippers, scissors, hair clippers. And we want to pair each of these new items up with something that the dog finds rewarding. And it's also important to remember that we have to make sure that the dog finds this rewarding. It's not something that we think the dog should find rewarding. The dog has to actually like it at that moment. So if the dog is, say, having a tummy ache, or if they're full, maybe a treat isn't going to be the most rewarding thing. But we want to make sure that we pair each new item up with something the dog does find rewarding. So we present the new item, give the dog something rewarding, stop the rewards when the item is taken away. And we also want to classically condition the dog to individual steps for new procedures, like the brushing, the trims, and the trimming the hair, and the trimming the nails, tidying up the eye area. So we want to break each procedure down into incremental steps and condition the dog to love each step before you move on to the next one. So you teach the dog to love the sight of the brush, teach the dog to love the feel of the brush on the skin, and then teach the dog to love the actual brushing action. So in each step, you want to make sure the dog is learning to accept comfortably the experience, and then you can move on to the next step. The important thing to remember is that the dog decides the pace, how fast we increase criteria. So here's a little video of me working with my buddy Spike. So he's going to be exposed to some new stuff here, some new sounds, and eventually a little bit of brush you. And you can see he get quite startled the first time he heard the sound of clippers being turned on, but the treats are very high value that we're using. We had a great combination that day of, I think, cheese, peanut butter, liverwurst, chicken, and meatballs. So he was having a pretty good time. Despite the fact that we're doing some strange, weird new things, that's also another thing to remember, that all the things that we do when we're grooming dogs, from a dog's perspective, probably seem very, very strange and very, very uncomfortable. So we introduce them slowly at first, help the dog get used to the process and see it as something they can actually look forward to rather than fear. And my number one rule for all interactions with a dog is to reward behavior you want repeated. So if the dog is offering you a paw when you want to do nail trims, fantastic. The dog is willingly going to go up onto a table, great. We don't ever want to take it for granted when the dog is doing something that's helping making the process easier. And we can also use some operant conditioning, some training to teach the dog new behaviors to help them actually participate in the care. And this is helpful because it can help us get the dog to offer behaviors that make the grooming process easier. And also, if they're participating willingly in these behaviors, that's one way of us that's one way that they let us know that it's okay for us to continue. If they're willingly, actively, voluntarily participating, we don't want to sort of force the dogs to accept things. Especially right now when we're trying to do some grooming tasks, we're trying to tidy up the dog for grooming maintenance purposes. We don't really have to worry too much about the dog being styled perfectly right now at this time while we're all kind of in isolation. We want to make sure some things that might become medically necessary, like we don't want nails to get so long that they affect the dog's gait. We don't want to let mats get so knotted that they are discomforting and painful potentially to the dog. So we do have some things that we might have to do for our dogs, but we don't want to do more than we need to. I think a lot of things you probably just want to wait until your groomer is actually open again. But I mean, there are some basic things we can do to make the dog a little bit more comfortable and, get hair out of their eyes so they can see clearly. And so we can see their beautiful eyes too. Some of the things that are helpful for a dog to learn are things like sit, down, and stand the duration. Getting a dog to stand on the table is helpful. Getting a dog to do targeting. Paw targeting is a great way to have the dog give you their paw for nail trims. Nose targeting is a great way to move a dog from place to place without having to grab them, so you can get up on a table or wherever you need to do some work. And mat targeting is a great way to get a dog into another place that you need to take it also. So if you put the mat on the table, you can sometimes use that as a way to get the dog on the table. And if you teach the dog to really like the mat that they target, having a favorite mat to target can be another comforting thing for them to do. And one of my favorite things to recommend for people whenever they're trying anything new, especially related tasks with the dog, is the bucket game with Chirag Patel. And there'll be a link at the end of this to his Facebook page where he has lots of resources to explain the bucket game. But that's very helpful. So with sit, down, and stand, I usually use lures to start a lot of these things, sits, downs, and stands, but we try to fade the lures out as soon as possible. So the dog's not actually just following the food. We usually add the duration in small increments, just a couple seconds at first, but getting the dog to learn to enjoying standing still or waiting for rewards, getting the dog to learn some impulse control, getting the dog to learn some patience can be very, very helpful when you're working with a dog on a table and trying to do different grooming related tasks. So we want to increase the duration at a pace that the dog can handle and make sure the dog is able to keep up, and occasionally throw in an easy repetition too, just so it's not constantly getting harder. And so here's my little buddy Spike again. I'm going to try and get Spike to do some stands on a table. Another fun thing about stand is it can also help you learn whether or not your dog actually knows the words sit, down, and stand. Because if you teach the dog sit and down, a lot of times people will tell me that the dog knows the words sit and down perfectly well. And I'll say, okay, show me. And they'll say, Sparky, sit. Sparky sits. They say, Sparky down. Sparky downs. And then I'll say, well, what would happen if you try something different? And I'll say, Sparky, sit. And Sparky sits. And then I say, Sparky, banana. And Sparky downs. Because he basically only has two choices, if it's sit or down. So if he's not in one, they'll probably try the other no matter what word you use. But you can actually make them learn the behavior a little more reliably if you throw in a third choice. But for our purposes here today, for grooming, the big benefit with stand is you get the dog to stand on a table. So if you have to shave somewhere underneath, or if you need to get at their back legs and their paws to do some trims, you can do that. And they can offer the behavior voluntarily. This is actually the first time I ever had Spike on a table at this point. So we're pretty happy that he was relatively relaxed and accepting of everything. And he has gotten an almost full groom since then. So my grooming equipment is getting a little on the dull side, and I don't really feel like taking it to a sharpener. So he's about half groomed now. So he looks a little messy, but he's in good shape. As I was saying a minute ago, targeting is one of the things that I like using a lot, both in training and in grooming. Paw targeting, like I said, is a great way to get the dog to offer a paw for nail trim. Nose targeting is a great way to move the dog from place to place. And mat targeting can be used to teach the dog to settle someplace that they're comfortable settling. So here's a little more of Spike and I working together. We're going to work a little bit more on mat targeting here in this one. One of the other things I often like to do when I'm working with a dog to teach them to get to like new things is, in addition to giving them treat rewards, you'll notice me doing through different videos a lot of baby talk with the dogs. So I use like my happy voice as a reward also. So after I click treat or yes treat, the dogs, I usually give them some happy vocal, often goofy, silly sounding verbal praise, because most dogs like that. So I like teaching behaviors in a variety of different contexts in different locations so that the dogs can generalize the behavior more easily. If you teach a dog a good, reliable nose target, on your living room floor, and then try to get them to do, a nose target following up a little staircase up onto a table, that's probably going to be too big of a jump. So you want to try it in a variety of different locations in different places. And this next slide is also talking a little bit more about the bucket game with Chirag Patel. As I was saying before, that's a great way to get the dog to offer consent when you're doing grooming tasks with your dog. So if your dog doesn't like getting nail trimmed, but they know that you've got a bucket with a whole bunch of their favorite treats and they can see it, and they know that if they sit still and just wait patiently, they'll get those treats. Then the dog gets to decide for themselves, okay, do I want to put up with this or not? And if they don't, then they get a break. But at some point, they're going to want the treats in that bucket. So at some point, they're probably going to decide, maybe I'll put up with it for a little while. But if you want to learn more about the bucket game, you can go to their Facebook page, facebook.com, The Bucket Game with Chirag Patel. And I think you'll find that a very helpful way to get your dog to cooperate in grooming care in your home with you. So when we actually start getting to the point we're going to do some grooming work with our dogs on the tables or wherever we do it, we want to keep in mind some of the fear-free concepts that we've all seen before. Touch gradient is one of the important concepts that we keep in mind. We want to initiate and maintain hands-on contact with the dog throughout the procedure. So we want to use a gliding touch with hands moving to, different parts of the body from the least to most sensitive. So if your dog likes being petted, say, around the collar line or scratched behind the ears or getting a little scratch by the base of the tail, then if you have to work on the nails and you have to grab their ears or do other things, you start with your hands somewhere where the dog is comfortable and then gradually move to the more sensitive areas and try to make that a rewarding experience. And if your dog is getting too stressed, then you may need to back off a little bit. But most dogs are going to be a lot more comfortable if you start with your hand someplace that like being touched and just gradually move to the more sensitive areas rather than just, going in there and grabbing a paw. Most dogs are not going to appreciate that. We also want to make sure that we're using gentle control. So we don't want to be using any more restraint than we need to. A lot of dogs are more afraid of restraint than they are the actual grooming process. So it's important to use minimal restraint. If I'm doing something sort of potentially dangerous, like trimming hair near the dog's eyes, you don't want to have the dog just wandering around freely and loosely. What a lot of times I'll do is I'll just hold like a little bit of hair under the chin or maybe the collar, very, very gently, no pressure. And then if the dog starts moving around a little bit, then I have a little bit of control so he's not going to accidentally like jam his head into like a pair of scissors or clippers or something uncomfortable like that. But I also don't want to be using unnecessary restraint. So if the dog starts squirming around, I'm going to let the hair go. I'm just going to take the tools away. You don't want to just sort of force the dog to take it. And so here's a little video of Spike and I just starting to do some work on eventually getting his nails worked on. So I'll start stroking his back. He really, really likes contact. Spike is a super, super affectionate dog. He's another dog that actually likes hugs. He'll initiate hugs. And he did not like his paws being handled though. He really hated that. But you can see using some touch gradient in the video, we start at places that he likes being touched and just go down to the places that he likes less. He's more accepting also because he's got some delicious treats on a little licky mat there to keep him occupied. And that sort of thing, like a little licky mat with peanut butter or yogurt or something like that, is one of the most helpful things you can do when you need to do some grooming work with your dog at your home, because it can keep them busy for a good long while with things that they really, really like. Now, when it comes to brushing, the two of the most important things to remember are that you need to get the brush down past the outer coat, down to the undercoat, and all the way down to the skin. The potential danger of getting the brush all the way down to the skin is that you could give the dog some brush burn if you're not careful. So what we're trying to do is, you're going to push the hair to the side a little bit, get the brush down to the skin, and then pull away from the skin without dragging the bristles along the skin, because that's how the brush burn is going to happen. So if we want to make sure that we're getting the bristles all the way down to the skin, because a lot of the matting and the knots get stuck in the undercoat. So a lot of times, some people, when they're brushing their dogs, they can brush their dog every single day. And after a month, they can think the dog looks pretty good. And then they take the dog to the groomer, and the groomer cannot get clippers through the coat because the undercoat is all very, very badly matted. So you do need to get your brush all the way down to the skin. You have to be very careful not to drag the teeth of the combs or brushes along the skin. And that can be a little tricky, and it can take a little bit of practice. So make sure that you're keeping a close eye on the skins and checking the hair repeatedly and checking the skin repeatedly to make sure that your dog is doing well. So here's a little video of me doing some brushing with Buffy, maybe not. So we got some little snafus with the video, but that's okay. The main point is the brush, like I said before, has to get all the way down to skin, and you pull away from the skin so you're not dragging along the skin. In shaving eye stops, that can be something that a lot of people have probably already tried doing now, because some of the hair in the dog's eye stop can go pretty quickly. It can sort of cover their eyes so you can't see the dog's eye anymore. Your dog may have some discharges from their eyes that can get sort of built up, and that may need to be shaved out. My dog Buffy isn't crazy about having her eye stop shaved, but she also knows that if she's patient, it won't wait too long, and she'll get rewarded well for it afterwards. Like I was saying before, you are going to need to control the head a little bit just to make sure that your dog isn't moving around into and actually that's jamming into the clippers by mistake. And, one of the ways to keep them in control is, like I was saying before, I hold either the collar or a pinch of hair between forefinger and thumb, whichever is the dog is more comfortable with. And it seems odd to me, but I think most of the dogs I've worked with, they're a little more comfortable with just gently holding the hair rather than the collar. But that will vary a bit from dog to dog. So just figure out what your dog is most comfortable with, that they find least aversive, and do that. The main point is it's just a safeguard to prevent the dog from being suddenly startled by something and accidentally jamming into the clippers or scissors or something. So obviously we don't want. Now, if you have clippers, one of the things you also want to do is make sure that you want to keep the blade of the clipper flat against the skin. You don't want to be having like the teeth sort of like pointing at the skin. You want the whole blade itself to be flat, so that the teeth of the clippers, they're just above the level of the skin, right at the base of the hair. And if you're trying to get the hair out of the eye stop, it's sort of like a very gentle scooping motion. And you can go all the way down to the snout, or just part way and leave a little mustache. But just keep the edge of the blade as flat against the skin as you can, and go gently and smoothly. You want to avoid halting, unsteady, or abrupt movements. And it's a very similar thing with trimming hair over the eyes and visor. If you're trimming the hair of the dog's eyes, brush it forward first, then control the head the same way you do with eye stop trimming. And you'll want to scissor straight across from left to right or vice versa. And you'll have to repeat this times in a row, because I don't think anyone ever really gets all the hair forward in 1, 2, 3, or even 4 brushing attempts. So you brush the hair forward a few times and then scissor across, and then do it a couple more times and see. You'll probably notice the hair's a lot more uneven than you expect it to be. Another thing that I also like to recommend is that you only keep the scissors open when you're actually cutting. Keep them closed all the time, and also keep them angled away from the dog's face. So if you have scissors or clippers, make sure the point is angled away from them until you're actually using it. If you have scissors, keep the scissors closed until you're actually cutting. And then when you are cutting with scissors, I also recommend that you don't open the scissors more than you need to. So you don't fully open them all the way. You only need the tips of the scissors to get the hair. So that way, if something happens, the dog moves around and they hit a little bit of the sharp edge of the scissor, there's only about an inch or so of sharp area exposed, rather than 6 inches of blade exposed. So if you have less blade exposed, if you have less blade exposed, if an accident happens, it will be less severe, because there's less sharp surface that's being exposed. And this video is working good. So I'm going to do a little bit of brushing and trimming with Buffy here today. She's partway through the groom. That's why her hair looks so uneven there. She looks a lot sharper today. Her groom is basically done. Buffy's Spike is still about halfway through. So you can see it's a gentle sort of scooping motion. Buffy's fidgeting a little bit, but she's pretty still. And she likes kisses too. That is one of her favorite things. I think she actually likes licking human faces more than she likes food. But every dog is a little different. And like I was saying before, you have to brush the hair forward multiple times, because the first couple of times you go across, you're not going to get everything. And it's a good idea to have the dog getting rewarded fairly often during the process too. So in addition to seeing me stop and give her treats a few times here and there, I also stop and let her kiss my face a few times, because as I was saying, that is one of her absolute favorite things. And there may be other non-food rewards that your dogs like more than kisses. Maybe a chance to do a trick is something that they find really rewarding. Maybe just silly, goofy, high-pitched verbal praise is something they find really rewarding. But you want to make sure that as long as the dog is cooperating and the things that you're doing to the dog, you want to make sure we never take it for granted. If the dog is cooperating, the dog is being good, we want to let them know we like it. And so nail trims can be tricky for a lot of people. A lot of dog groomers struggle with nail trims. more than they would even admit, I think. You don't want to attempt nail trims until your dog is happy to have you handling their paws. So that was why we were talking about conditioning exercising and training exercising at the start of the webinar, because you want to make sure that your dog is comfortable with you handling their paws before you even try. Now, nail trims are one of those things that at some point they actually become medically, physically necessary because they can interfere with the dog's gait. Sometimes some nails can even get long enough and curl back up into the paw. So nail trims do have to get done, but you also want to make sure that you're not making your dog more afraid of nail trims. So if your dog is still walking comfortably, if your nails aren't like growing up into the pads, I wouldn't be too aggressive or trying to make sure that you get the nails cut as short as possible. A lot of things, as long as your dog isn't experiencing discomfort, a lot of grooming tasks should probably wait until you can get to your groomer again. And if you do have a real health issue where your dog's nails are getting long enough that they're growing up in the pad and there's a risk of infection or other problems, then go to your vet. Your vet can handle a nail trim, and your vet can handle other medically necessary grooming tasks. And if it's not medically necessary, just wait till your groomer's open again. They'll be happy to see you. One of my favorite things to use to help dogs get used to bathing is a licky mat, like the one pictured here. This licky mat actually was a gift from Fear Free after completing the Fear Free grooming certification. The great thing about licky mats is they have suction cups on the bottom. So if your dog doesn't like going to getting a bath, you can teach your dog to love the bathroom, the tub, the sound of running water. A lot of times just by spreading some peanut butter on a licky mat and sticking it in the place where you need to do some work, like on the side of the tub, in the bathroom first if your dog is already afraid of the bathroom. And yeah, the little knobby surface on the licky mats make it take longer for the dog to get through the material on it. So it's a good way to keep a dog occupied for a good long time with something that they find really, really rewarding, and you can stick it in one place. And so we're almost 1:30 and it's getting about time for question and answers if anybody has anything.
All right, thank you so much, Daniel. The first question that we got was asking for tips on washing a dog's face. She has a Westie Poo Foster, and it's her first long-haired dog.
Oh, okay. Well, the first thing, I mean, where the dog's hair is long, it's you're probably going to need to get the dog's. It's probably going to need quite a bit of work making sure that the dog's hair is not free before you start washing it. Because if you start washing hair that's all knotted up and matted, that'll oftentimes make the mats worse. The main thing I think you need to do is maybe if you can keep the hair kind of short as much as possible around the face. So you'll have to teach the dog to enjoy and be comfortable with having their face handled and a little bit of restraint. One of the best ways to do that, and this is what I did with my new little buddy Spike, is just before you do anything that the dog really, really loves, like going for a walk, having a dinner, having a play session, having a training session, just handle the dog's face for like 1 or 2 seconds, give them a good treat and reward, and then go do whatever fun thing you like to do. The way I helped Spike get used to having his nails handled was every time we went for a walk, I'd grab his paw, give him a treat, leash him up, go for a walk. And so, I walk him several times a day. So several times per day, he would get his paw touched for a couple seconds, get something great, then have some fun. And then the next day, I'd hold it for a couple seconds longer maybe. And then the next day, I'd do it while showing him the clippers. So you'll have to get the dog used to having their face handled, but just do it a tiny, tiny bit at a time. Just like a couple seconds, and then have something really fun happen.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what blade would you recommend on the eye trim? And if the eyes haven't been scooped before, would you recommend starting to keep the face cleaner?
I usually use a 10 blade. The blades I usually use are Oster. One of the cool things about Oster blades is my hairstylist friends tell me that they use the same blade. So I think I'm going to give myself maybe a poodle cut or something in a couple of weeks. I can't get my hair styled. But yeah, I usually use a 10 blade for scooping out eye stops. And if it's dirty and there are a lot of discharges, you may need to have like a cotton ball with some warm water to wash out get the discharges out first, make sure it's sort of clean. And also you don't want using your clippers on really unclean, dirty hair, because then they get dull and beat up faster.
Great, thank you. The next question is asking for advice to make the bath experience better because the dog won't lick the peanut butter from the lick mat.
Ah, okay. Well, then you just need to find something else that the dog finds really rewarding. It may not even be a food item. Maybe play a game of tug with your dog in the bathroom, and then maybe play a game of tug in the bathroom while water's running. And then maybe play a game of tug while water's running, and then just sprinkle a little bit of water on the back. The key is really like it's break it down into smaller and smaller steps, and find things that the dog likes rewarding to pair up with it. The licking mats are super helpful just because they're, like I said, you can suction cup them in place and they stay in the same spot. If your dog doesn't like peanut butter, you might still be able to have some luck with a licking mat if you tried maybe a little bit of liverwurst. Liverwurst is not particularly healthy. It's got a lot of fat. It's got some onion and garlic powder, but but a little bit of it once in a while for really hard situations can really help a lot of dogs. I was using quite a bit of liverwurst with Spike the first couple of weeks, and that was a big difference maker.
Great, thank you. The next question is, our dog is sound sensitive. Are there quiet trimmers available for dogs like him?
Don't actually know of any clippers that are particularly quiet or unusually quiet. I think the best thing for that though is an app for your phone called Soundproof Puppy Training. I think it costs a few bucks, but it's cheap. But it has all the different sound effects that a lot of dogs are sensitive towards, and it does have clippers on them. That is one of the sound effects. And the great thing about the app is it's on your phone, so you can control the volume. So you start with it barely audible. If you can just barely hear the clippers, then your dog can definitely hear it because your dog has better hearing than you. So start with it barely audible, pair it up with awesome things. And when the dog's response is consistently good, then you can raise the volume a little bit. And it shouldn't take, as long as you're really methodical and paying close attention, letting the dog decide the pace, it shouldn't take too long for the dog to get used to clipper sounds.
All right, thank you. The next question is, how do you get the hair around the paw pad area?
If it's around the paw pad area, usually use scissors around the edge. If you're talking about like the area in between the paws where you have to kind of scoop it out a little bit, if it's between the paws, then I'll use like a 10 blade and sort of scoop it out of there, sort of like you do scooping out eye stops.
All right. And on that note, are there any tips for using clippers to trim hair between the paw pads? We currently use scissors and she's comfortable with the handling. We're just gradually introducing the sound of the clippers.
Yeah, it's a similar scooping motion like you do with the eye stops. If your dog has already learned to tolerate having their paws handled and having scissors handled there, and they're not sensitive to the sounds, then it probably won't be a lot harder. And as long as your blades are in decent shape and they're not like damaged, the risk of giving a cut while you're shaving out a paw pad is fairly low. Just make sure that the movements are kind of smooth and that the dog is able to sit still.
All right, thank you. The next question is, do you have any tips on what to use or how to clean dog tears in ears?
Well, there are commercially available products you get for cleaning out both. I think most dogs should have their ears cleaned with some ear cleaner that you'll buy like at your vet clinic or at your pet store. For cleaning out eye stops, most of the time, most dogs just like a soft cloth, a little bit of warm water is good enough to get most of the material out.
All right, thank you. The next question is, are there any extra tips for reactive dogs who do have a history of some biting?
Well, if you have a reactive dog who has a history of biting, it's probably a good idea to do some muzzle training. Some people aren't crazy about muzzle training, but it really is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And at the end of the webinar, one of the links that we have there is for the Muzzle Up project. And the good thing about the muzzle training is if you teach your dog to love the muzzle, like you approach training with the muzzle as a game. So it's not like oh, I got to do this thing. It's I'm going to play the muzzle game with the dog. You know, you can fill the muzzle up with some peanut butter or yogurt or something, take some treats and stick them through a long bully stick that goes through the basket muzzle until the dog has, and bring it closer to you until the dog has to push their face into the muzzle to get the treats. But the idea is you teach the dog that the muzzle is a game. It's a fun thing. Wonderful things happen with the muzzle. And then when you're in a situation where where you're doing something where you are afraid, maybe the dog at some point might get mad and try a bite because he's got a history of aggression. Then instead of the muzzle being a source of discomfort for the dog and stress, it's like, oh, that's a good thing. That's one of the games we play. So the problem with the muzzle a lot of time is people don't pull out a muzzle until they need one. And then the dog is exposed to a new thing that they don't like, probably uncomfortable with. And as a result, their emotional state gets worse. But if we teach a dog to love the muzzle first, then when we pull the muzzle out, their emotional state may actually improve at the sight of it. So that's one of the things I think, even if you don't think your dog needs a muzzle training might be a good idea anyway, just because it can be a game, it can be fun. And if someday you need it, instead of being a source of stress, it's a source of comfort.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how often should you bathe your dog?
That varies wildly from dog to dog. I think ideally, every couple months is probably pretty good. It's not necessarily as often for a shorter haired dog. But yeah, that varies wildly from dog to dog. And I don't think we're going to be in isolation long enough so that unless your dog is already overdue, you're going to need a bath. So if we're stuck, in our homes for a couple months, if your dog had a bath sometime in the month before it started, I don't think you're going to have to worry too terribly much about it.
All right, thank you. The next question is, do you cover the ears while bathing or spray from behind?
I don't usually bother to, but some dogs will feel a lot more comfortable if you do. If your dog has some sound sensitivities, or if they are sensitive to their ears being handled or water getting in their ears, then covering their ears up is probably a very good idea. We usually would just use just stick some cotton balls in the ears if the dogs are comfortable with that.
All right, thank you. The next question is, what tips do you have for trimming black nails and how to see the nail bed?
Black nails are hard. So that's one of those things where if you're doing it home because you can't take your dog to your groomer, just tiny bits at a time, very, very little bits. And after you've taken off one or two or three tiny little bits, when you see the texture of the nail start to change, or maybe even see like a circle or maybe even like a rounded off triangular shape starting to open up, then you're probably getting close to the crick and you want to stop. But the safest thing really is to just take off a tiny bit, and then wait until you can get back to your groomer or vet.
All right, thank you. The next question is, I don't have a fear-free certified groomer within 40 miles. What question should I ask a groomer to find a good one?
I'm going to ask the groomer how they handle dogs that are feeling stressed. See if you can find out what other people that have taken their dog to their groomer, what their experience has been. Ask the groomer if they have any training experience, if they know anything about conditioning and counter conditioning. If there are no fear-free certified groomers in your area, you can probably find a fear-free certified veterinarian or vet technician that can do things like nail trims also.
Thank you. The next question is, we are using a 1-inch guard attachment, and a lot of the time the hair is so fine it just falls over and ends up not being cut. Any suggestions for getting an even shave?
I think really you just kind of have to go over it multiple times. You can I usually just have the clippers going in the direction of hair growth. Sometimes with depending on what kind of coat the dog's hair is, you can sort of go side to side and change the direction a little bit to try and get a little smoother, a little more even. But yeah, I mean, I think at this point in time, I don't think we're getting the hair super even isn't really our highest priority right now. If it's not coming out really even, then maybe you need different clip-on combs or different guards, or maybe you just need to hold the blade or the clip-on comb or the guard a little flatter against the skin. A lot of times, if we hold it at too much of a weird angle, it'll cut a different amount of hair, and that'll make it more uneven also. So keeping the blades and the guards flat against the body is one of the best ways to make things even.
All right, thank you. The next question is, what do you do when the dogs are already extremely fearful of nail trimming? Any quick ways to condition them?
If they're extremely afraid, I don't think there's a quick way. I think the quickest way is probably what I was describing earlier, what I was doing with our rescue dog Spike, who was very uncomfortable having his nails handled, his paws handled. Every time you do something that the dog enjoys, like a training session, a play session, tug session, their dinner, a walk, the first couple times, the first day, just touch the paw. Give them a yes and treat or a click and a treat, and then go do something fun, or give them their dinner or whatever they had. And if that happens several times for 1 second on day 1, and then it happens several times for 2 or 3 seconds on day 2, within a few days, hopefully your dog starts kind of looking forward to the paw handling. I had a big thrill that I actually got kind of emotional about. I got a little misty-eyed with Spike. I had been doing this for a couple days, and I grabbed his leash, and I grabbed some treats, and he offered me his paw. I'm like, oh my God, he likes it when I touch his paw now. But you do have to do it very incrementally, and if the dog is struggling, then you move too fast. You got to back up. The key thing is the dog chooses the pace.
All right, thank you. The next question is, do you have any tips for shaving around the ears?
Shaving around the ears can be pretty tricky because it's such a funny shaped area. I mean, there's little bumps and grooves and flaps, and so unless you've already got quite good mechanical skills with your grooming, I probably wouldn't do a lot of ear trimming. If there's massive amounts of excess hair, you can safely get off large chunks of the excess with some scissors. But I probably wouldn't do too much super precise hair trimming around the ears right now, just because that is one of the more dangerous spots. It's really easy to cut an ear.
Okay, thank you. The next question is washing a Cavalier King Charles every weekend too much? We just do a daily walk on pavement, nothing like hiking. What is the problem if it's too much?
Well, I think it's probably more than necessary. It's probably not doing the dog's skin any real harm. But yeah, it's probably, I don't think any dogs really need to be bathed that often.
All right, and then the final question is, what would be a good way to train my dog to scratch his nails on a grinding surface?
A great way to do that is to if you've already taught your dog any paw targeting, teach them to paw target something like this, like a sandpaper or the heart of the surface that you want to the dog to grind their nails down on. So if you've got when you teach dog paw targeting, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll have a treat on the ground, cover it with our hand, and then when the dog tries to sniff at it, lick at it, doesn't know what to do, as soon as they try pawing at it, then we reward that. So if you want them to like scratch at a sandpaper or some kind of a scratch board, we teach it more or less the same way. You just instead of covering the treat with your hand, you cover it with the surface that you want the dog to paw at to get their nails down.
All right. Thank you so much, Daniel. And thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. You'll be able to find the recording of this webinar on fearfreepets.com within the next week. Thanks again and have a great day.